So anyway, it's a very relaxed seminar. Let's see what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes on yoga and the management of anxiety. Now, normally when we think of yoga in the context of anxiety, we think of therapeutic or medical yoga and generalized anxiety disorder. But I'm not going to tell you about that. I'm going to talk about yoga to manage situational anxiety, which all of us will have experienced, and all of us being healthy persons. So for this, I'm going to take you back hundreds of years in time to look at the 8 limbs of yoga. Now, this was described by the sage Patanjali several hundreds of years ago, and out of the 8 limbs, I have selected 6 limbs where we can see how yoga practices can be adapted to manage anxiety. These are principles, yamas and niyamas. How should we interact with ourselves? How should we interact with others? What about the physical postures, regulated breathing, and 2 practices relevant to meditation, focused meditation and relaxed, effortless meditation or dhyana. So coming first to the principles, this is something I'm very keen on at present, the role of the principles of yoga in therapy. Now, which principles do we talk of? We talk of at least 3. These are kleshas. Kleshas are causes of suffering. They could be excessive attachment to something, very attached to something. If you don't get it, you get anxious. Excessive repulsion to something. You really don't like a person or a thing. You encounter it, you feel anxious again. So this is just 2 examples of 5 kleshas. Then there are the niyamas. So niyamas are principles which we have to take into consideration in hands when we are dealing with ourselves. Are we contented? Are we able to be self-aware? For example, yamas, how we should or should not interact with others. We should interact with others with simplicity, moderation, and many other principles. Now, what's the use of these principles? I've taken 2 of our very early studies here to make a point. When healthy people are suddenly faced with unimaginable anxiety, how do they cope with it? We had an occasion to see this twice. We had healthy people in the Andaman Islands. Suddenly there was the tsunami in the Bay of Bengal, and they lost their relatives, their possessions, their homes. And later, about 10 years after that, flooding in the state of Bihar. Again, people were in this terrible state of anxiety. They've lost everything. What will happen? Will they get it back? We found that the practice of yoga was good, but the principles really added the detail. And then we went on to study it. What happens if you give some people practice, some people theory? Are you going to get the same anxiety-reducing effect or different? So this was in our center. We had 300 people who came, and like most people today, they wanted a quick fix. 2 hours is all we can spare. You reduce our stress. So we gave 150 of them practice, 150 of them theory. And at the end of it, both of groups benefited, slightly better with the practice group. Why am I saying this? If you want to really work on your stress and anxiety, don't only do yoga practice. Do understand the philosophy of yoga. So moving on. Asanas. Asanas, we all know, physical postures. And for this, though we have got studies, and we are doing studies currently on asanas, but I'm not going to quote those. I'm going to talk about 2 very elegant studies done in Boston by a colleague, Chris Streeter. Now, if you look at the cartoon on the slide, which says, whatever I have, I'm nervous, I blame it on my transmitters. All of you will know that throughout the day, we may make comments like, I feel a surge of adrenaline, or I have a dopamine kick, particularly in relation to social media. So all these are things which we blame on the neurochemicals in our brain. Now, one particular one is called GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is actually low when people are anxious, depressed, addicted. So Chris Streeter, this neurologist from Boston, measured it in the brain with functional magnetic spectroscopic imaging, and she wanted to see, can a brief period of yoga make it go up? So she did that, and she found that just 60 minutes of asanas can make this neurochemical called GABA increase in the brain, 27% after just 60 minutes. And it was published way back, but then these are all healthy people. So what if you have a person who's depressed, a person who's anxious? Would it be the same? Would they get these benefits? And this is important because if you look at health magazines today, I'm sure you must be seeing many in India as well, there are adverts like this. Are you anxious? Could you be low on GABA? And then they advertise these capsules. And of course, some of these capsules may be good, but it's always nicer if you can have a non-pharmacological intervention where you yourself can do something. So again, they looked at the brain and they said, can we do it in patients, increase the GABA? So this time they took people with depression, major depressive disorder is Chris Streeter's next study, and they gave them not 60 minutes, but 12 weeks of yoga. And at the end of the 12-week period, again, there was an increase in GABA in the brain, and it had come up to the level of healthy controls. So for the first time, there was some real evidence, or if you don't want to call it evidence, at least well-informed study, saying that GABA does increase in the brain. So we can say that when we actually do yoga, something is happening to our neurochemistry, which really impacts everything about our feelings. And with this, I'll leave asanas behind. And now I'm going to take up pranayama. Pranayama is our main thrust focus area of research at Patanjali Research Foundation. Swami Ramdev ji, our respected founder, has really taken pranayamas to the man in the street. It's customary now when you go around, you can hear people saying, I know about Kapalbhati, I know Anulom Vilom, and so on. And that's all because of respected Swamiji. So in connection with this, I'm going to focus on our research related to pranayamas. Pranayamas can help in anxiety, at least in 3 ways. These are the 3 which I thought about when I was trying to think what to say in this simple meeting. The first way is by regulating cortical functions. What do I mean by this? In this slide, you can see the cerebral cortex as a bluish-green folded upper mantle of the brain, what we normally called the gray matter. All the higher functions subserved by the cortex. What is so special? All of us are breathing now, but you're not thinking about your breath. But if you want to, you can make your breath slow, you can make it fast, and all this is possible because the cortex regulates the breath. It's just a little bit of interesting information. Not only in man, only one other evolved species has this ability. And these are the lovely cetaceans, dolphins, porpoises, and whales. Now, what is so special about this ability? The cortex can regulate the breath. We can make it slow, we can make it deep, we can make it fast. But it is not only that, it is bidirectional. So when we regulate the breath, automatically, the breath regulates the cortex. And that's the wonderful way we all have a tool within our bodies to regulate our highest brain functions. So very interesting. I looked at many, many years of our research and our ongoing studies, and I've summed it up as 3 points. Suppose you want to focus intensely. These are some of the highlights of pranayama practice and the brain. Suppose you want to focus intensely, very important for the students. Each time you focus, you actually have a slight increase in your blood pressure, which is not good. But if you want to increase your ability to focus without that arousal, pranayama is an excellent way to focus without arousal. These are based on our event-related potential studies, which we are currently have done and are currently doing using P300 as well as other event-related potentials which we have developed. Especially, which is good for this. If you want one name of a pranayama, Kapalbhati. If you want a pranayama which does not allow that surge in the blood pressure to occur, Anulom Vilom. What about the brain waves, EEG? The EEG actually keeps changing all the time. If we are mentally very active, doing some sums, for example, mental arithmetic, we get a lot of fast waves, beta and gamma. If we are just sitting quietly and have our eyes closed, maybe not meditating, but just eyes closed, relaxed, we get alpha. And when we are very deeply relaxed and even in light sleep, drowsy, we get theta. Very, very deep sleep, we get delta. What happened with pranayama? 2 examples. When we looked at the EEG, and this is a summary of many years of work, including some recent studies, the brain waves after the practice showed slowing in the case of Anulom Vilom, whereas if you want a quick way of getting an immediate effect, we've noticed this consistently from 1995 to 2022 with Om chanting. And we've compared it against one, we've compared it against many other controls. So these are pranayama and higher functions. Moving on to another aspect, parasympathetic. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, I'm sure everyone who's interested in yoga knows these terms and has used them quite a bit. So sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest. Now we are talking a lot of parasympathetic through vagally mediated HRV. These are actually terms on everyone's tongue, which are worked and a bit overworked also. But anyway, the vagus nerve also has some other effects. Very important, when we are in that calm state of rest and digest, we are much more liable and likely to be socially interactive. So this is the whole theory, the polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges. So when a person is relaxed, they are much more liable to be seem able to interact with the next person. They seem pleasant. They sound pleasant. They don't look stressed and very anxious. And such people are more easy for the next person to talk to and interact with. So these are the functions of the vagus. So why do we want to? Obviously, we want to be in the vagal state, which are the yoga pranayama practices. And again, I'm summarizing years of work in this, based on, of course, vagally mediated HRV, various other measures, and so on. Of course, skin conductance, plethysmogram, and so on, which practices immediately allow you to get into the parasympathetic mode. Anulom Vilom Pranayama, Brahmari with the extended exhale, to some extent Bhastrika. No parasympathetic activation in the following nostril-regulated breathing. Surya Bedan, which is the traditional text description. Right inhale, left exhale. Surya Anulom Vilom, right inhale, right exhale. Chandra Bedan. So we should know that Chandra Bedan doesn't activate the parasympathetic. And Kapalbhati. Should I wait for someone? Okay. Kapalbhati causes parasympathetic withdrawal. So moving on. Finally, we come to the effect of pranayama on the emotions. It's a very interesting bidirectional connection. When we are in a particular emotional state, our breathing pattern will change. I'm sure all of you have noticed. You're anxious, you breathe in one way. You're very relaxed, your breathing will be a different. If you haven't noticed, notice it. How your breath changes with your emotions. Very important. Not only that, if you breathe in a particular pattern, you can actually induce an emotion. This is a very interesting study. Certain emotions, certain breathing patterns. And why is it important? So I'm going a little faster. There are specific breath patterns in pranayamas. This is actually one of the areas we are taking up very intensively. The rate of breathing is higher in Kapalbhati, the depth in Bhastrika, the nostril breathed through varies with Anulom Vilom, and so on. Prolonged exhale is the characteristic of Brahmari, and oral breathing and some others. So now, with this background, I would like you to look at this. Fast and deep breathing might characterize arousal. Now look at Kapalbhati. You see there's a pre and a during. The simple wave shows you how a person, any average person, breathes before they do Kapalbhati. And during, you see it looks like a saw or like a comb, up and down sharp strokes of inhale, exhale. And this is the breath pattern which goes with arousal. Similarly, Brahmari has its own pattern with a prolonged exhale, and this is characteristic of deep relaxation. Bellows yoga and Anulom Vilom. The most important feature for Anulom Vilom pranayama is that the breath pattern during is almost same as the breath pattern pre. I would like you all to look at this. What does it mean? If you want to breathe in almost the same way as you are breathing at any baseline state, but change only the depth, so that the one feature that will be changing is relaxation, that is best with Anulom Vilom. And so we did a study at Patanjali, and in fact, this is our current focus of research. If you have Kapalbhati, Brahmari, Bhastrika, and Anulom Vilom pranayama, and you compare them with control periods, which of the four is best for relaxation? Which of the four is best to reduce anxiety? Which of the four is best to improve focusing? Which of the four is best to, say, increase energy? So I'm just going to present our anxiety findings. When you see here, all four pranayamas reduce anxiety, most so with alternate nostril breathing, where there's a 10% reduction, and least so for Kapalbhati, though that was also significant. And this is currently what I consider a very important way forward, where you compare practices. So we had 50 individuals all doing all the practices. So all 50 people practiced Kapalbhati on one day, all 50 practiced Brahmari on another day, Bhastrika on a third day, Anulom Vilom on a fourth day, and 2 controls. So 50 people into 5 sessions. A lot of work, but it really answers this question well. So now with this, we get a general message that arousal is better with Kapalbhati, reducing anxiety and quietening the brain better with Anulom Vilom, and moving on to meditation. Meditation is something we've done in several studies. It's not really our main focus in Patanjali, but I've really done it a little earlier. But we have some research work going on chanting of Om. We've looked at Om meditation as well as loud chanting of Om. We've looked at, through the years, transcendental meditation, Brahma Kumari's Raja Yoga meditation, a study on Vipassana with this university, I think it's Spain, cyclic meditation of Svyasa, and so on. And even a tiny little study with heartfulness, which I'm happy to say we concluded. So here, the research on meditation shows almost the interesting points and similar points as pranayama. So I'm trying to give you a few take-home messages. If you want better attentional focus, these were the meditations we found really good at improving the P300 as well as some other event-related potentials. Om meditation, Vipassana, especially Vipassana because there was no surge in blood pressure each time the people focused, and the Brahma Kumari's Raja Yoga meditation. Shift towards parasympathetic dominance, very much so, with Om meditation and another technique called cyclic. Cyclic meditation has asanas and lying down in supine rest. It also is very good for nighttime sleep. And again, for state anxiety, almost all meditations that we've studied have helped. There is still a lot of work to be done, because if we want to say that any of these techniques can be used with pharmacological level of evidence, it does not exist for yoga. So those of you who are in the field and interested in doing something very dynamic in yoga research, there's still a lot to be done to prove the level of evidence. We don't have it, and we need many more studies. I will complete this part of the presentation and go to the last part. 3 examples of healthy populations whose anxiety we have managed through yoga. Primary school teachers. Now, if you think of teachers who teach primary school children, you don't normally think that they will have terrible amounts of anxiety. But when we had these teachers at Patanjali Yogpeeth, our center, we found that yes, they were anxious, and their anxiety was related to their job. They felt that they had a high target to complete, even though the children were so small. Anyway, we had 2 groups, an experimental group, a control, intensive yoga for 15 days. And at the end of it, the experimental group reduced their anxiety. But this was not surprising. So we actually had another group. These were border security force personnel. They have very high levels of anxiety and arousal. These are the young men from the army who actually are guarding our country's borders. You have to be in a high state of vigilance to do it accurately. So when they came to our center, they all had complaints of poor sleep, very high arousal. They just couldn't defocus and go to sleep. So then they had a very intensive program at Patanjali Yogpeeth, a 12-day program, 6 hours of yoga per day with asanas, pranayama, meditation, and everything. And at the end of it, yes, their anxiety came down, overall arousal was less, and their self-rated sleep, time taken to fall asleep, sleep disturbances came down. So last and very last, I'm mentioning a third example, students. Now, what did we do with students? We did a cross-sectional study in Roorkee, which is close to our institution, comparing 142 students who practiced yoga every day with 142 of the same age, same gender, same local area and habits and everything, who did not practice yoga. And we looked at their smartphone, what is called excessive use. This means people who use the smartphone for every single thing, who wake up in the night to check it, who hear a ting or a sound of a message and jump up to check what the message is. That is excessive use. And we found that excessive use was less in the students who practiced yoga, which we felt was an important message associated with other findings in them, like reduced anxiety relevant for this little meeting, better affect or positive emotions, and so on. They also had better self-esteem, self-awareness, so they could see when they were getting almost addicted to the smartphone and withdraw a bit. And so these are important, and I'll leave it with this message. I've really come to the end. If we have this question for ourselves or for anyone else we know, how to get rid of mobile addiction, yoga is a good way, and there are specific yoga practices right from the principles, asanas, the pranayama, and even meditation. So with that, I'll end. Thank you.